Mark Mullinax here. Welcome back, my friends, to this podcast and class on Taoism, as scripted in what we know as Tao Te Ching, or the scripture about the way the universe works and its power. Today's verse is number 46. I call it Arrhythmia. One quick caution. One word ahead is on the rough side. Practice careful listening.
When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. The sweet sound of the river as she moves over the stones. The same song that the blood in your body sings as it weaves around your bones. When you're listening, are you listening?
Every day you have enough, more than enough. Everything needed to sustain life is already here. When we do this, every day, it leads us to an outlook of contentment and an attitude of respect to all creation. It's a revolutionary idea. In a consumer society, contentment is a radical proposition. Recognizing abundance rather than scarcity undermines an economy that thrives by meeting unmet desires. Gratitude cultivates an ethical fullness, but the economy needs emptiness. You have everything you need. Gratitude doesn't send you out shopping for satisfaction. It comes as a gift rather than a commodity, subverting the foundation of the whole economy. That's good medicine for land and people alike. Robin Wall Kimmerer, Braiding Sweetgrass.
Today's reader and question asker is Eric Kane, who describes himself this way.
My name is Eric Kane. I live in the Asheville area of North Carolina, and I teach high school courses in history and economics, and I enjoy learning about different spiritual practices and religious traditions.
Today's verse is about what we sync with. It asks a question about what tempos or cadences do we live by? Who sets the time or rhythm-keeping pacing? Is that rhythm produced by nature or by a culture's expectations? Specifically, at what speed and with what expectations do we travel through life? Is it a pulse of multitasking, an overworked schedule that becomes an unsustainable thing because it's an unbalanced arrangement? And here's the rub. If we are living a sped-up life full of excessive stimuli or obligations or things, is that a joyful place or time? And if not, then how in the universe would our true nature or character ever manifest itself? How would we know that the enough of life is actually all we need? So an important verse here. So let's get right to it. Eric, please read verse 46 for us.
When the world syncs with Tao, horses live on farms. But in a world out of sync with Tao, horses train for war in the cities. Two extreme imbalances, the trap of always being lured but never knowing satisfaction, and the curse of every craving totally satisfied. Balance, to know when enough's enough is enough.
Implied in this verse's first line, which reads, when the world syncs with Tao, horses live on the farms, there's this implication that we should tease out what horses actually do on farms. Farm horses do everything naturally, from eat their oats to drink water from streams to poop, and horses may be used for simple tasks like hauling manure. Life does not get any more basic, simple, or spontaneous than what a horse on a farm does. Then this verse contrasts with what horses, if repatriated from farms to the city, would do in an urban area of China. In the city, horses would be stabled and enabled for war, violence, and other unnatural, artificial, and futureless tasks. Now, a mind game. Instead of putting horses in this verse, insert humans. We, like horses, can be trained for unnatural things like violence. True. However, the question of what is the nature of a horse could lead to the thoughtful person to wonder, what is the original nature of a human being? What is the original nature of the universe, for that matter? What are we made of and made for? Are we made to buy, consume, and then forget things? Are we made to be unmade by unnatural forces like violence, avarice, and materialism? Whatever our nature is, Tao is repeatedly clear. Our nature is not to enable violence or to justify it. As we have seen, violence is a trigger for more violence. Think of the obvious wars today, or the 45-plus wars going on today that are not obvious. A common feature of each is that someone has drawn some line in a sand which then becomes concrete in someone's mind, that is, a hard but artificial line which is not to be messed with or crossed. For to cross that line would be a violent act in someone's preset mind and would require, scare quotes around require a response from the side that drew the line. A line on which so much hangs, but an artificial line. No humane future here. Now I get it. In relationships and in communities, there are lines we do not cross. We know these. Do not violate someone's body, mind, or spirit. These are sacred. Do not steal, and so on. However, a Taoist sensibility would not need such obvious signposts. They would already know, naturally, not to violate or to steal already. That knowledge comes in our original instructions. So to be content as a human is to be content with what is already, just like a horse is content with what is already. Life without unnatural violences can be full of manure, so to speak, but the good kind. And what is more natural and already around us than manure? Refuse, trash, organic matter, waste products, all which we can take and turn that manure or refuse or trash into some kind of fertilizer with which we can apply to the very earth that birthed us. It takes a while to turn a blasted or overworked field into a garden or farm space, but Tao is not into speed. Tao is about contentment, not contending. The work of the Taoist, if work is the right word here, is to allow the natural to proceed. Allow the manure spontaneously to transform a space from useless or violated to useful and healed, as it was in the beginning, now and forever shall be.
People of this world wrap themselves in chains for the sake of profit and gain, then talk of the world of dust, the sea of bitterness. They do not know that clouds are white, mountains blue. Rivers run, rocks stand tall. Blossoms invite, birds laugh. The valley responds, the woodcutters sing. This world, after all, is not of dust. The sea, after all, is not bitter. It is only that, on their own, people put dust and bitterness into their hearts. Hung Ying-ming, Master of Three Ways.
This verse then speaks about what happens when the natural and spontaneous processes of nature are not being allowed to work, or they get blocked, forgotten, ignored. Metaphorically speaking, constipation or diarrhea results. In a word, a different timetable, schedule, rhythm. Usually this different timetable is a speeding up of things. If we were to map this sped up timing onto a heart, we would call it arrhythmia. Out of sync with nature's time then, like horses off the farm, we prepare for violence or reactivity. We use our creativity to draw lines no one can cross. We up the ante for what gets us triggered or gets our finger on some trigger. Remember how Tao teaches about the power of emptiness, though? If we are full of someone else's timetable and its demands and preset reactivities, then how can our true self emerge? Tao is about the slowed down pace of nature.
Adopt the pace of nature. Her secret is patience. Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Emerson's right, of course, but instead of adopting the pace of nature, how about returning to nature's pacing, nature's patience? There's no adopting here. It's already part of us, our original timing. We just readapt to it. So how does arrhythmia happen? How do we start to adjust to the maladjustment of culture's programming? Little by little. A compromise here, a comfort there, a little easing of attention over there, and soon we have adopted actually, a different timing and rhythmic beat. Arrhythmia is a choice, which gets our eyes off the prize of patience and Tao and onto the impatience of a world gone mad and is striving for its manufactured, artificial substitutes for the natural. This is how imbalance happens. We forget, we develop amnesia actually, about what we are to be. Removed from our metaphorical farms, we move to the metaphorical city and adopt its paces, its values, its expectations, its presets, and shortcuts to speed things up. I have lived in Washington, D.C., New York City, and Seoul, Korea. I know this. If history is any indicator, very few cultures, if any, and very few persons escape this hamster wheel. Faster and faster we go, thinking that we are actually nearing some goal or being useful. Our electronic devices were originally thought to help us with labor saving, as in labor-saving devices. But haven't our devices become our time sucks, our balls and chains? We get on their rhythms, their arrhythmia, and then, before we know it, we cannot tell how much is enough, when enough is enough, when to retire from acquisition and amassing things that cannot satisfy, at least for long. Just one more purchase, just a little bit more. Add this one thing to the recipe of life I'm cooking. The tragic Greek myth of King Midas is this verse's object lesson. Midas's craving was granted. Everything he touched turned to gold, including his food, drink, and then his daughter. When asked once, how much money is enough? John D. Rockefeller replied, just a little bit more.
When you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, are you listening?
Untamed desire has a poverty of its own. The idea in the Chinese here for being lured from one's original balance suggests the useless flapping of a bird caught in a trap of misery-making anxiety, of always desiring something that is impossible. Thus lured, one will ever seek and ever see roadblocks instead of portals, hear white noise instead of music. Whether bird, human, or otherwise, when we cage ourselves, our natural instincts decline. Adjusting to the presets of culture, instead of Tao's original instructions with which we are born into and born with, we get on this treadmill where we get, see, hear, and even experience exactly what we prepare ourselves to get. What we practice, we become. So our verse reads,
Two extreme imbalances, the trap of always being lured but never knowing satisfaction, and the curse of every craving totally satisfied.
What's at stake here? Uninterrupted desires are the waters in which we drown. It was thought in some wisdom traditions of China that too much pleasure-taking, unbalanced, and diminished not just an individual, but an entire household. Pleasure seduced the pleasure-seeking into suffering.
Remember verse 9, early retirement. A cup filled past the brim is waste, and a knife over-sharpened loses its edge. Fill a space with too much gold or jade, and who can guard it? Overwork yourself with honor, status, or pride, and how do you avoid ruin? Too much of anything leads straight to meddling chaos. Early retirement is heaven's nature.
Early retirement is Taoism's analog to Buddhism's nirvana. Nirvana is not some spiritual dress after we die, but that moment-to-moment availability of saying no to the unnecessary and feeling or knowing the joy of non-entanglement. Likewise, in early retirement, we are obligated to satisfy our basic hunger, but not to overconsume anything more. Overconsumption, overabundance, over anything leads to imbalances, and this is how we start to suffer, by resetting our expectations and expecting those expectations to happen.
Nothing is enough for the person to whom enough is too little. Epicurus.
The human being is, on any non-Taoist rhythm, nothing more than a marionette, ever and always at the mercy of someone else's desires. In today's language, which is harsh, I know, we become somebody's bitch. This is avoidable. Retire your marionette strings. Hand them back. Learn that stop and go reside within yourself already as choices. Those who seek daily to retire and decrease the unnatural lose their self-imposed fetters and chains. But stay with society's patterns and fulfill its expectations, get mired in conventional common sense thinking, and remain on that hamster wheel. An addictive life of senseless addition and acquiring will be like you pile up this heap of raw meat, and then your life becomes one of trying to drive all the flies away. Eric, there are 2 quotes here for you to read.
M.K. Gandhi was quoted once, "Reduce your wants and supply your needs. Our needs make us vulnerable enough. Why increase our vulnerability?" Or, as Oscar Wilde phrased it in his work Lady Windermere's Fan, "In this world, there are only 2 tragedies. One is not getting what one wants, and the other is getting it."
Argue for, justify, and plan for a life of imbalance, and sure enough, it's all yours. But balance, harmonize, and sync with our true selves, we shall confidently know, as our last line of the verse verifies.
Balance. To know when enough's enough is enough.
Balance or imbalance? Which is more a life worth living? Drunk on imbalance, we try and try and try, and we get tired. Drunk on things, falling down drunk, we enter territory not meant for anyone human. The unexamined life of Socrates is a not human existence. The person who strides toward and strives for saturation and overloading should think this over, like maybe more than once, because even a choice to live in imbalance can and shall start to feel like home.
If we are to leave a beautiful world for you and your grandchildren, we have to take seriously the fact that creation does not belong to us. We are part of creation. We cannot do what we like with earth, water, and other human beings. God expects us to keep the earth in good condition. Mercy Odeyoya.
Can we be smart enough to know when enough is enough? In a spirit of gratitude, we have no reason to set boundaries, draw lines in the sand, or develop our precepts for what makes us happy or fulfilled. Living in gratitude, no one can thread their marionette strings into us. Learning when enough is enough, that's a skill already within us and a practice to keep us safe. Enough is not about quantity of life. Enough is a decision about its quality. So we leave this verse with gratitude, echoing in our ears. Gratitude turns what we have into enough, and that's a miracle enough for today. Let that miracle find you ready to receive. Okay, Eric, let's hear your question, please.
Does the Tao Te Ching share specific practices that might best help someone or a society better know when they've had enough and not too much? Please share some examples if so.
Thank you, Eric, for this insightful question. Since the individuals are the ones that make up society, and even one person, leader or not, can influence a society, there are common practices that I think individuals and societies can practice to avoid extremes, excesses. Tao Te Ching does not prescribe practices per se, but it does teach habits of mind and heart that can help us know when we've had enough. These have both individual and community or societal implications. Such habits include things like, well, first of all, we often know as individuals when we've had too much by our physical symptoms: stomach ache for overeating, hangover from too much alcohol consumption, or a speeding ticket or a crash with too much speed. So something goes wrong, and that's when we know that we violated the Tao within us. Tao Te Ching talks a lot about taking on too much and how desires, when unskillfully pursued, usually ends in trouble. And from our teenage days, we can all remember how unmanaged desires can land us in hot water, right? Such unmanaged desires, ending badly, happen when our desires go beyond enough. But can we learn from these? Well, I hope so, maybe. So the first practice is just awareness of how our bodies work and how too much of anything can negatively impact the body of the individual or the collective body of society. Notice how too much or out of control behaviors or habits pretty much lead to nowhere. So know one's limits, know one's impulses. These are the royal roads to practicing enough, and they're very Tao friendly. The second Tao Te Ching teaching emphasizes the concept of Wu Wei, often translated as non-action, or as I like to phrase it, wise action, or action done without egotistical interference. Wu Wei training encourages individuals to align with Tao rather than strive excessively against Tao and force the outcomes. And we know that when we force things, we have gone too far, like forcing a relationship or forcing a child to obey you. Forcing breaks things like minds and hearts. And this applies on the individual and the community or societal levels. Too much of anything, control, government policy, or policing, usually carries negative consequences. But by practicing Wu Wei and retiring early from excess or control, one can then begin to cultivate what I think is a sense of balance in what the word enough means, and maybe begin to recognize when to stop striving and just simply be content with what we have. A society often does not learn or practice self-control, however, and we all pay for such lack of consciousness about what is enough. Because, as we all know, wars always go quickly to the extreme, and climate changes are directly related to our not knowing when enough is enough. Now, third, a derivative of Wu Wei is to embrace simplicity, something we privileged Westerners could still use lessons in. Tao Te Ching encourages simplicity in all aspects of life, from one's material possessions to one's daily activities, even keeping a calendar. By living simply and without excessive desires, individuals can avoid the trap of constantly seeking more, and we can recognize when we have reached a state of sufficiency. The person who cannot practice sufficiency rarely sees others in states of deficiency. Fourth, practice detachment. Now, detachment doesn't mean apathy or indifference, but rather the ability to just let go of things or attachments to outcomes or desires. By releasing attachment to specific outcomes, leaders can then develop skillful means to govern. Listen to verse 57 teach this, and this quote sounds like it could come directly from a government leader. When I practice non-interference, or Wu Wei, people naturally transform themselves. When I practice peace and quiet, people are spontaneously honest and fair. When I practice doing nothing, people enrich themselves naturally. And when I have no desires, people return to their original, uncarved block state. So the leader who leads best may be the person who is invisible, not the one who wants their face in the evening news every night. When a government has or enforces too many rules, it makes its citizens into rule breakers, just like my parents did for me when I was a teenager. They imposed all these rules and the thou shalts and the thou shalt nots. But I learned from all this how to be secretive, how to get slippery and devise all kinds of rule avoidance and rule averse behaviors. I seemed like I was a nice kid, but I was a secret rule breaker. So at the individual and societal levels, Tao Te Ching often questions the multiplication of rules, regulations, and schemes by its rulers. The presence or the imposition of controlling rules means something non-Tao is already afoot. Now, rules may be well-intentioned fixers, but the more laws, the more people are scofflaws or law evaders. When people are on a short leash, like I was as a teenager, we often spend our creative energy trying out shortcuts through regulations and compliance to avoid these things. Too many rules trigger disrespect and a search for the loopholes. The principle here is the tighter one weaves or controls things, the more loopholes get created. Instead, a good leader will rule more by goodwill than by excessive control. So in conclusion, teachings of yin, yang, and wu wei, when practiced, reveals how, when our lives get out of balance, something or someone will get hurt. On the communal or societal level, our climate crisis shows the destructive power of not knowing when enough is enough. So let me end this overlong response with an example of driving a car, Eric. I think driving a car is a perfect metaphor for the practice of enough is enough. Too much speed kills. Oversteer your car and you roll over. The way to drive a car is to apply a very practiced hand to the steering wheel, turning it at the right time and not before and not after, nor with force, but keep a trained light foot on the gas and the steering wheel, just enough of them both, and you get to your destination more safely. Too much, and you're likely to get hurt or hurt someone else. Note the contrast ahead. Even if one were to sit on $1 million or $1,000 in cash, it is difficult to locate or sit in more than a moment of happiness before cares and cautions take over. But on the other hand, even one single meal can make a person grateful for the rest of their life. Whenever our excesses become too ponderous or weighty, the labor and energy it takes to keep or to maintain our excesses will create in us aversion, not happiness. But if lightly held, or when lightly conceived, joy and love show up spontaneously from those covered up places in our hearts. The power of enough lies not in the getting, not in the doing, even not in the thinking of just more and more, but rather in the liberation of the individual and the society from the endless pursuit of excess and control. That's what we call knowing when enough is enough. This podcast is an original labor of love, designed, written, and co-produced by many, whose central idea is that Tao Te Ching remains good news for today. Tao still speaks. Thank you, Eric Kane, for your voice and question. Thank you, Alder Davis, for your artwork. The song Put Your Roots Down is graciously donated by songwriter and singer Molly Hartwell. All these folks are Asheville, North Carolina residents. The copyright for quotations from Tao Te Ching is held by Fortress Press. May your days begin in the awareness of what is enough, to become wombs for radical sufficiency and gratitude.
Are you listening?